Hello and welcome to our webinar. Today we'll discuss our progress for improving the U.S. payment system. I'm Jean Rourke with the Federal Reserve and I'll be your facilitator. Our presenters today are Connie Thine and Dan Gonzalez. Both Connie and Dan are Vice Presidents of Industry Relations for the Federal Reserve System. I'd like to review a couple of call logistics before turning it over to Connie today. Hopefully you've joined us via webinar, but if you haven't done so yet, click on the webinar link you received after registering. This option offers a few benefits. You can watch the slides as they're advanced, you can type questions to us at any time during our session, you can download the session materials, or even choose to listen to the audio through your PC speakers. Please note the webinar performance depends on your connection, so if at any time you're having problems, just pick up the phone and dial the toll-free number. If your slides aren't advancing, you can press F5 on your keyboard to refresh your page. As I mentioned earlier, you can submit questions to us at any time by clicking the Ask Question button in the webinar tool. And kicking off our call today is Vice President of Industry Relations for the Federal Reserve System, Connie Thine. Connie, take it away.
Thanks, Jean. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have almost 300 of you with us today, and we're really excited to provide you with hopefully some valuable information about the payments improvement initiatives that have been underway for a year now, and also to allow some time at the end to answer your questions. Dan and I are going to tag team to keep things interesting and keep you awake for the hour. And feel free to ask questions along the way. We may, to ensure that we just get through all of the content, save them for the end, but if anything pops up and grabs our attention, we'll try to address it as we go. I'm going to keep things moving and jump right into slide 2 and remind us why we're here. A year ago, on actually, to be specific, January 26, 2015, the Federal Reserve published Strategies for Improving the U.S. Payment System. And you'll recall that this paper outlined 5 specific strategies for improving the end-to-end speed, safety, and efficiency of payments, both domestic and cross-border, and specifically through a collaborative approach. And so today, just over a year later, we wanted the opportunity, you may have been participating along the way in a number of these things, but we wanted the opportunity to share progress, what's been accomplished so far, as well as what's next, and highlight opportunities for you to get involved or continue to be involved in 2016. So let me jump into strategy 1, slide 3. I wanted to just take a minute before I talk about what we've done in support of this strategy to emphasize the fact that here we're talking about our strategy is about stakeholder engagement. And we specifically use the word stakeholder because our goal is to engage everyone involved in payments end to end, including ensuring that we have consumer perspectives informing our improvement initiatives, that we have small businesses and corporates, that we have financial institutions and technology providers and standards groups and rules groups, consultants. Really, our interest is in having a very diverse group of stakeholders contributing to solutions and the path forward and achieving our desired outcome. And as I talk in a minute about what we've accomplished in this realm, I think that you'll see we've really, we're pleased to have been pretty successful in bringing lots of voices to the table. So let's talk about how we've done that. And jumping to slide 4, in support of our collaboration strategy, you've likely heard about the fact that we've established 2 task forces last year. In May of 2015, we established the Faster Payments Task Force to support Strategy 2. That task force at the time, actually now I think the exact number is 331 participants in that task force. And again, 331 folks, including consumer organizations and large and small businesses, trade organizations, banks of all sizes. Really a very, as you can imagine, with over 300 folks, it's a very diverse group. We established the Secure Payments Task Force right on the heels of that in June 2015, and we've got over 180 members of that task force, and again, recruited to ensure diversity of perspectives. Both of those task forces have steering committees made up of essentially members who represent the various segments. We identified for each of those task forces 8 distinct stakeholder segments and ensured that the steering committees of both had representation from those 8 segments. So the task forces, you know, lots of folks, perhaps some of you even on the line, sort of challenged us about whether we could really be successful with managing task forces of that size, open to all comers. And, you know, even within the Fed, I think we had some apprehension about how challenging it might be to manage groups of that size. And I can say without hesitation that it's really been a fantastic experience, and we've used lots of, besides the steering committees, sort of a smaller group to help guide the work effort. We've leveraged working groups, we've leveraged lots of creative forms of interaction, surveys and flash polls and drop-in calls and in-person meetings to really find ways for groups of that size to effectively contribute to the work, to interact, to share views, perspectives, and help design the work products. So, so far, it's been a very successful experiment, and when we talk about strategies 2 and 3, you'll get to hear some of what those groups have accomplished. We've also supported collaboration and education in support of those important efficiency-related strategies. And specifically, you may be familiar with the Remnant Coalition. That group's been in existence for several years, but we've done lots of work in partnership and in support of the work of that group to get broader awareness of the work that they are doing and collaboration and input. We also have supported the effort to advance an ISO 20022 strategy in the U.S. and by supporting stakeholder work group efforts to broadly educate and gather input from the industry and stakeholders on that initiative. And then last, I will just note, you know, we continue to focus on also communicating and engaging folks beyond the work groups. You know, there are lots of us who are very interested in the work that's going on, but perhaps don't have the time to commit to participating directly in some of these groups. And so over the last year, as I noted, we've provided surveys as a way for you to have input into strategies. We've hosted webinars. We've probably hosted or participated in, you know, 200 to 300 speaking engagements and industry meetings. And so through those mechanisms, through communicating with the Fed payments improvement community, we've also tried to cast this very broad net to provide the opportunity for folks to be aware, provide input, and follow these initiatives. So on slide 5, you know, a year into this, we felt it was an important milestone, and we have taken the opportunity over the last couple of months, including in preparing for and hosting this webinar, to communicate sort of at this important checkpoint, what's been accomplished, where are we going next? And you can see here on the slide, as part of those communications, which were released February 2nd, Esther George, the president of Kansas City Fed, and Governor Jay Powell, both, we conducted interviews with them on the work that's underway. They are the co-sponsors of these payment system improvement initiatives. And we conducted interviews and published those to fedpaymentsimprovement.org to acknowledge this year 1 milestone. We also published a February 2016 progress report that is online. in addition to releasing the faster payments effectiveness criteria at the same time, which Dan is going to speak to in a few moments. So lots of communication. If you haven't sort of read, those are good synopses and insights related to kind of the update we're going to provide you today, and I encourage you to go to the website for more info. So with that, collaboration, again, that was our foundational strategy, and that was the foundation we laid for, the industry in partnership with the Fed to do good work on these other strategies. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Dan, who is going to talk to you about strategy 2, faster payments.
Thanks, Connie, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and have the opportunity to give you an update on some of the work that we've been doing in support of the strategies that were laid out. So as Connie mentioned, I'm going to jump into strategy 2, which is tied to a faster payments effort. And if you think about faster payments, when we talk about faster payments in this context, it's really talking about a real-time or immediate type of payment process, essentially something that really doesn't exist here in the U.S. but has existed globally in other countries. There's about 17 countries or so that actually have a faster payment capability or real-time payment capability up and running today. And then a number of other countries that are currently looking at the possibility or in the process of implementing a real-time payments capability. So Connie highlighted really leveraging our effort as far as bringing the industry together, forming a collaborative process all around trying to drive to a faster payments capability in the U.S. So moving on to slide 7, just highlighting and reminding folks of the mission and the objectives of the Faster Payments Task Force that were laid out. So the objective, the mission of the task force itself, as was laid out in the strategies paper, was to identify and evaluate approaches for implementing a safe, ubiquitous, faster payments capability in the U.S. And the way we laid out the task force objectives was really to bring the industry together to ensure that there's good representation of the views on the needs in the future for a safe, ubiquitous, real-time payments capability. The other objective of the task force was to assess the different approaches that might be brought forward or might be available to actually foster a real-time payments capability. And then finally, for the task force to actually address other issues that were deemed important to the actual successful implementation or development of a real-time payments capability in the U.S. Connie mentioned the diversity in the group. Just to kind of give you a high-level overview of those that are participating in the task force, about a third of the 330 or so that are participating actually fall into what we kind of bucket as end users or support organizations. Another third is made up of financial institutions, all the way from really small organizations up to some of the largest financial institutions in the U.S. And then the last third is made up of service providers and network operators. So we do have a very nice, diverse group of individuals. So the things that I want to go through today are a little bit of the high-level timeline and work plan. So moving on to slide 8. And then we're going to highlight some of the accomplishments that the task force has already brought to the marketplace. And one of the nice things about the process was certainly with the diversity of the group, and you think about vested interest and different perspectives that are coming to the table, was that in the short time frame that this group has been together, they've actually been able to deliver some key work product for the industry to take a look at. So looking at the high-level work plan and timeline for the group, we've just wrapped up phase 1, which is typically what we refer to as plan the work, so laying out the groundwork for the task force, how they're going to actually move the process forward, getting a lot of the foundational work that was needed to actually allow the task force to work together and move the process forward. So that was just wrapped up with phase 1. We'll be moving into this phase 2, which we're calling do the work, which is the development and assessment of the different solution proposals that the task force will then review through the process. And then third, once that is complete, they'll move into phase 3, which is documenting the work and having the findings or the assessment of the proposals, as well as identifying any gaps or different opportunities that are available to the marketplace to actually move the process forward. So taking a look at that and actually coming up with that deliverable from a time frame perspective. Right now, the task force is looking at wrapping up their work in the first quarter of 2017. So what did the task force accomplish so far this year? Moving on to slide 9. The first thing that they actually accomplished was bringing the group together and determining how they were actually going to make decisions. So we've talked a couple of times about the diversity in the group, the different viewpoints that are there. But when you think about that, you do have to bring a process whereby the entire group has the ability to provide their input, let their views be heard and discussed. But then at some point, they need to make a decision and move forward. So one of the first things that they came together to do was actually identify a way they would do that and created this decision-making framework, which essentially laid out a process for how any vote that comes before the task force would be moved forward. It requires a supermajority. There's some details on our website where you could actually go and take a look at the decision-making framework. But it also includes a requirement whereby votes are actually made public. So once a vote is made by the task force, those votes are then publicized to the general public so that folks can see how the task force voted on any given topic. Next was this glossary of terms. Essentially, one of the first things that we realized when we brought this diverse group together was that folks had different perspectives and different working knowledge of what certain terms meant. When you think about authentication versus authorization, folks had some confusion around how those words were being used in the conversations of the task force. So it was pretty clear early on that the task force really needed a common lexicon to work off of when it came to the task force efforts. So we created this glossary of terms through the task force input to try to identify how specific terms would be used in the context of the task force proceedings. So not everybody's definition was maybe part of the glossary, but what was agreed to was that for the work being done in the task force, whatever was in the glossary would be used as part of that dialogue. Next was the effectiveness criteria, and this was one of the largest deliverables that the task force pulled together. Essentially, the effectiveness criteria provided a description of stakeholder needs when looking at the desires and needs for a real-time, faster payments process. And it's also the criteria that will be used during the assessment of the various proposals that come through. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the effectiveness criteria. So let me move on to slide 10 so we can take a look at how the effectiveness criteria themselves were actually created. So like I mentioned, it's a description of stakeholder needs that can be used certainly by the marketplace to guide faster payments innovation. So as different service providers and innovators are out there in the marketplace, really gives them a good sense of what the task force, again, speaking for the payments industry, felt was needed in a real-time payments capability. And then this framework that the task force will use for actually assessing the various approaches that come forward. But the process to actually pull the criteria together was a culmination of a number of different inputs that came from the task force, as well as subject matter experts, number of community polls. All this input turned into essentially 5 different versions of the criteria, the 5th being the version that the task force actually voted on and then approved as the effectiveness criteria going forward. So those were approved with strong support from a majority of the task force members. We actually had about a 97% consent rate when the vote was held. So a lot of strong support for the criteria as it was brought forward, and then moving it forward through the process of the work that is happening with the task force as far as the assessment of the proposals. So moving on to slide 11, you can see here what those effectiveness criteria are, at least from a grouping perspective. So there was actually 6 groups that came together or 6 groupings that were formed around the criteria. You can see them here, all around ubiquity, speed, how fast a payment should be when you're talking about a real-time payment capability, how efficient the payment process should be. Certainly you can't talk about a faster payment capability without talking about safety and security of those payments and how that process would be managed in a real-time world. And then finally, governance and legal. What's the framework going to be around managing this new process and creating a framework to actually facilitate a real-time payments capability in the U.S. So you can see we've got the 36 criteria that were laid out here. The document that we do have on our website gives you all the detail around those criteria, including a number of sub-criteria that are laid out within the criteria document. But feel free to take a look at those. It's about 31 pages worth of criteria information that are out there. But in addition to that, there is a nice little summary document on the Fed Payments Improvement website that boils it down to only a few pages worth of information around the criteria. But you can see that this was the work of the task force to bring this all together to kind of lay out that framework for what was desired when it comes to a real-time payments capability in the U.S. One thing I will note, a lot of folks have asked about the criteria and how is the U.S. actually going to achieve these. The task force was clear that the criteria as laid out are aspirational in nature. So many of these things that were laid out as far as desires or wants may be a challenge to achieve on day one. Certainly no payment system was invented with its final form on day one, but it does lay out from an aspirational standpoint what if we had the ability to have the perfect payment capability, this is potentially what it would look like. So the task force has been clear on that not everything needs to be met on day one, but these are certainly aspirational goals for a real-time payments capability. So let me move on to slide 12 and talk a little bit about what's next for the Faster Payments Task Force. A couple of different things. One is happening right now, this capability showcase. This, again, was a desire of the Faster Payments Task Force to create sort of a virtual online community whereby the different service providers could actually show or highlight what capabilities they have in the marketplace today that could potentially support a real-time payments capability. And another desire of the showcase was to give folks the ability to go and find specific providers or capabilities that could solve or meet the needs for some of the criteria. So we've actually laid out the showcase in a way that highlights the criteria that the various service providers can actually address. So we've opened up this portal. It's kind of a dual process where we have a place where the task force members can collaborate in sort of a semi-private mode, but then we've also made the showcase public, and that is linked via fedpaymentsimprovement.org to our YouTube channel, where you can actually view a number of different video clips that highlight some of the capabilities that the various service providers have decided to highlight as part of the faster payments process. So that is up and running today, and we expect to continue that over the coming months as the task force work continues to unfold. Next, like I mentioned, is moving into phase 2, which is the solution proposal and assessment process. So this is where any task force member has the ability to bring forward an end-to-end solution that would meet the faster payments needs of the U.S., so addressing all of the 36 criteria that have been laid out in the effectiveness criteria document. So those proposals will actually come forth as part of the task force process. they're looking to be assessed by a qualified independent assessment team. This is a group that essentially the task force took a look at the process and said, you know, it might make a lot of sense to have this as a very focused and specific group that could potentially have the expertise, but more importantly, the independence to review these proposals. Because if you think about it, the task force is made up of a number of organizations, potentially competitors. So one of the thought was, you know, we really need an independent process to facilitate the review and the assessment of the various proposals as they come forth. So the group is in the process of being stood up, the QIAT, and then we're planning to open up the proposal window on April 1st to actually allow the different solution providers the ability to submit their proposals into the QIAT process. So that'll go forth over the next few months, and then the task force will also have an opportunity to review the assessments and then provide their input into what they are seeing as far as the different capabilities or different solutions that come forward for meeting a real-time payments capability. So those are a couple of the highlights of what's next with the faster payments process. So Connie, in the interest of time, I think I'll turn it back over to you to start talking a little bit about Strategy 3.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, so slide 13, Strategy 3, Payment Security, focuses on reducing fraud risk and advancing the safety, security, and resiliency of the payment system. And on slide 14, you'll see that a key tactic for advancing on that strategy was establishment of the Secure Payments Task Force that I talked about earlier. And the Secure Payments Task Force really has three objectives. The first, and one of the biggest rocks in terms of amount of work to be done, is to determine areas of focus for payment security and prioritize those for action by the task force or industry. And I will speak to exactly where the task force has come out on those priorities in a moment. The second objective of the Secure Payments Task Force is to advise the Fed on payment security matters. And this relates to, you know, the Fed, obviously, we invest a lot across the organization in conducting research around security issues. We contribute to a lot of industry standards efforts related to payment security. We've undertaken education on these topics here and there, and certainly as an operator, we invest a lot in ensuring the safety and security of the payment systems we operate. And so this objective was designed for the task force to give us input about all of those other efforts outside of the task force that the Fed is engaged in, and the priority of those, the benefit of those efforts and commitments to the industry, and, you know, suggestions for enhancing our work efforts. So that's the second objective. The third is to coordinate with the Faster Payments Task Force. We established this role of the Secure Payments Task Force to consult on the FASTER initiative to ensure that the outcome of that is a ubiquitous, fast, and safe payment system. And so, as Dan noted, the Secure Payments Task Force has also contributed to the effectiveness criteria and will have an ongoing role in the work of the Faster Payments Task Force. So I want to focus my time on talking about what the task force accomplished last year, and more importantly, what they're working on this year. On slide 15, I noted the effectiveness criteria, and I'll highlight those security criteria for you in a moment. But the Secure Payments Task Force, they were part of the funnel that Dan described, and the Secure Payments Task Force established a work group specifically to focus on editing, assisting in drafting those 11 security-related criteria. The full Secure Task Force weighed in through surveys and discussions at their in-person meeting. So they played a really important role in shaping 11 of those 36 criteria. They also, these next two buckets that I noted, as I said, we briefed the Secure Task Force on a number of our initiatives related to both standards and research and solicited their feedback. Specifically in this category, I would highlight the Federal Reserve's retail payment study. I'm guessing that many of you are familiar with that study, which we issue every 3 years, and it is going in market. Data collection will happen this year again in 2016. And so in 2015, we were revisiting that survey, the design of the survey, the information collected in that survey, and specifically sought Secure Payment Task Force input on the fraud data aspects of the survey. And you'll see when the results of this year's survey are published, usually there's a preliminary report, at the very end of the year, and the official report will come out in 2017. You'll see that we've expanded the fraud data that we're collecting through the survey. And in addition, based on both feedback from the Secure Task Force, but even prior to that, the security roundtables and forums that we've hosted in the last few years said we really brought a more frequent insights into fraud trends would be helpful. And so in response to that, we also will be executing an annual version of the study, a piece of the study, a smaller scale effort annually so that we can get more frequent insights from that research. So that was something that the Secure Payments Task Force had some input into. And then last, as I noted, the task force, unlike perhaps the Faster Payments Task Force, whose charter was fairly well defined in terms of being directed to evaluate alternative approaches to faster payments and identify effective approaches, the Secure Task Force, we sort of left it a bit more open to say we are looking for this industry stakeholder group to identify the highest priorities and decide what the group can and should do about those. And so there was a process from the time mid-year that the task force kicked off where they sort of assessed the full landscape. There was a bit of brainstorming where members of the task force brought forth issues and ideas that they felt were payment security, perhaps pain points that needed to be addressed. And those were developed, explored, whittled down, and eventually prioritized through somewhat of a voting mechanism to 4 top priorities. By the end of the year, with the plan to kick off work efforts in 2016 for each of those priorities. And those priorities are noted on slide 16. The first of those is payment identity management, and probably no surprise to anyone here that that came out as one of the top issues. And we, in January, kicked off a work group to focus on payment identity management. It's led by Nancy O'Malley of MasterCard. There are about 40-ish members from the task force on this work group, and they have had a couple of meetings. And really their problem statement essentially describes that there aren't universally accepted ways to establish and verify the identity of payment system participants. And they've had lots of discussions about even the definition of participant in terms of today that meaning people or devices in the payment chain. And so their work effort is underway. They are beginning with an inventory of existing ways that identity is established, verified, authenticated, and they're using a use case approach to that work. So looking at different use cases and channels and documenting identity management activities throughout the full payment chain for each of those. They'll move on in the second phase of their work to assess the effectiveness of those activities as they work today, and identify where the weaknesses and gaps are, and then develop really a recommended set of policies, practices, protocols, a framework, if you will, that reflects best practices and enhancements to be made to the processes. So that's payment identity management. Law and regulation coordination. This work group will kick off later this year, and this recognizes the challenges with inconsistent interpretation and application of laws and regulations, and the resulting sort of inhibition, perhaps, on the advancing security of payment systems. And this is an issue that's come up repeatedly in our discussions with the industry over the last few years, the challenge of laws and regulations in the security space, and the balancing act of not getting too far out in front of innovation and stifling innovation, but then also keeping up, and coordination across all of the different regulators and bodies in the payment system who touch this, and consistency and communication across those entities. So that will be a challenging one that will kick off later this year. The third listed here, information sharing for mitigation of payment risk and fraud. This is being chaired by Glenn Ulrich of U.S. Bank. It just kicked off the first week of March, and those folks will look at, the absence today of sort of standard metrics, reporting protocols related to, sharing information on risk and fraud. There is somewhat a lack of information sharing happening today, but even where there is information sharing, this sort of inconsistency in how we do it, how we define things, how we report them, limits the value of even what is happening today. And so, again, that group is looking at, current sources of information, existing channels, and really also assessing where would we as an industry get the highest return on investment here? Identifying truly the valuable information that different parties could use to prevent or stop, mitigate the impact of fraud. And then last, data protection, another heavy hitter issue that the industry has been challenged with for several years. This work group also will kick off later this year. This group will be chaired by Reed Luttanen of Walmart. I should have noted law and regulation coordination will be chaired by Victoria Strayer of TSYS. But data protection, too, will kick off likely in the mid-year time frame with their work effort. And, this is, this is one of those issues that can almost be solving world hunger. But the group looks to develop a framework for end-to-end, data protection and requirements and best practices for practitioners through the whole value chain. So that is the work underway, and I will say that, the task force, the steering committee, the work group chairs, now that the work effort is fairly well defined, they are keenly interested in additional folks who want to get involved, who really are passionate about these particular issues. And so I'll put out the invitation that it's not too late to join the Secure Payments Task Force and participate in one of these work groups if you are so interested. On slide 17, effectiveness criteria, Dan covered this fairly well. I mentioned sort of the process that the Secure Task Force went through, so I'm not going to go into this at length. It is really, these are tough issues. I think some of what's been done here in terms of describing the desired attributes of a payment system as it relates to safety and security can really be informative relative to our legacy payment systems as well. So I encourage you to go out and read these, just as a couple of examples. S1, risk management, speaks to a framework, that ideally solutions will have a framework for addressing legal, credit, liquidity, operational, and other risks. This gets into some of the issues for managing risks of different types of payments. So think, there was a lot of debate at the lower level of this criteria related to credit versus debit. S10, end user provider authentication. This describes a robust mechanism for identifying and verifying both in enrollment and transactions, users and providers. So a lot of good detail to the security criteria that I think can provide insights for work unrelated to faster payments. On slide 18, so what's next? I won't dwell here. Certainly I described the work groups. Those are going to be there's going to be a lot of activity around those 4 work groups this year. Again, invite you to get involved if you're interested. As Dan described the assessment process for the FASTER Task Force, I noted the Secure Payments Task Force 2 will be engaged in commenting on the solution proposals that come forward and the extent to which, they feel that, they're addressing these safety and security criteria. There also are potentially strategic implementation barriers and issues related to security that the Secure Payments Task Force membership may comment on and contribute to. So that's what's next for the Secure Payments Task Force. Let me move on and speak to strategy for payments efficiency. And this is one of those strategies that is much less maybe singularly focused than strategies 2 and 3. And there are a lot of initiatives going on here related to efficiency of domestic and cross-border payments. On slide 20, we highlight a few of those initiatives and accomplishments. You'll recall that strategy 4 emphasizes electronification. So this is looking at legacy payments and figuring out what are the barriers holding back full electronification of payments. We know that small businesses in particular are heavy users of paper checks, and so there's been a very big initiative led by the Remittance Coalition that we've been supporting related to small business education. And specifically last year, the Remittance Coalition published a small business payments toolkit, and we've been for the last 10 months doing lots of promotion and education, trying to reach out to small businesses through the Small Business Administration, through financial institutions, through technology providers, to help small businesses understand how to use ACH and card and other electronic mechanisms. Another Remittance Coalition initiative has been focused on a B2B directory concept and how a B2B directory and making it easier for businesses to pay one another electronically by virtue of a directory that would give you that information that it's very difficult to manually get, account information and how people prefer to pay and the data that they want to come along with it, how a directory mechanism might facilitate more electronic payments. And so 2015 was an important year in terms of the Remittance Coalition designing that directory and preparing for a proof of concept and thinking about how to operationalize an industry tool like that. Last, on the standards front, lots of work going on within the vendor community and to look at ISO 20022, other standards that can support and enhancing standards and educating about standards that can support electronification. If you go out to the Remittance Coalition page on our website, you would see a number of technical reports. An example was the Remittance Standards Inventory Technical Report that inventories remittance standards. So even letting people know what's available and what's out there was seen as a valuable way to start people down the path. as well as some other work efforts that are specific to particular verticals and industries. So lots of standards focus. Slide 21, what's next? I spoke about the directory, and the focus in 2016 is a proof of concept. So putting that directory concept to the test to really understand and finalize recommendations concerning trust and governance, business model, how you would roll out, how you would drive adoption for the directory. There's a lot of work going on in terms of what the governance or ownership structure of that kind of utility might be. And a directory, so there's work going on to design what the Payments Directory Association would look like to bring that to production. There also, I noticed the standards work continues, and specifically this year a focus on ISO 20022 remittance standards. So a work group to focus on education and promotion of the standards that exist and tools for helping people move from legacy to ISO format. All right, another focus on slide 22 of strategy 4, again, broadly but specific to wire transfer and ACH, has been development of an ISO 20022 implementation strategy for the U.S. for wire transfer and ACH. And 2015 was a year focusing on educating folks about the standard and the benefits of the standard, sharing information that came out of the study that the stakeholder group did in late 2014. We established, to support that education, a resource center on fedpaymentsimprovement.org, where there's lots of information about the study, about the initiative that's underway. We have had webinars, so there are recorded versions of the webinars there that introduce you to ISO 20022 and the initiative. And there are a number of resources developed by NACHA specific to ACH that talk about the existing support in the format, especially as it relates to remittance for ISO 20022 formatted data. And in 2015, importantly, the stakeholder group, which initially collaboratively looked at wire transfer and ACH strategy, split into two subgroups focused separately on those two payment systems. And the wire transfer group completed a high-level implementation strategy for wire transfer in 2015. The ACH group continues to focus on education and assessing use cases and value proposition and alternatives for the ACH network, which speaks to slide 23, which is the what's next. On the wire transfer side, they are focused on a detailed plan and timeline for implementation of the strategy, kind of following on to their work of the high-level strategy. And just, to give you a taste of this, and there is information on fedpaymentsimprovement.org, including information about some webinars that we're hosting. But by 2017, we will have finalized planning and will announce the format specifications, the application development, the testing part of it, really converting our processing platforms to support the standard will happen in 2018, and we anticipate that Fedwire and CHIPS customer testing would happen in 2019. So roughly, at this point, very high level, but a production rollout roughly in 2020. On the ACH side, as I said, continuing industry education and really looking deeply at the rationale and benefits of the potential conversion of the ACH network to ISO 20022. And, on the ACH side, it's really, there are alternatives, to integrating with ISO 20022, where there might be conversion and mapping and some strategies like that, versus converting, the fundamental platform and format to ISO 20022. So still exploring value proposition use cases for those different alternatives prior to making a final decision on the strategy for the ACH network. All right, with that, I am going to turn it over to Dan again to speak to Strategy 5.
Thanks, Connie. And just as a reminder, so we do have a number of questions, so we'll get to question and answer session here in a minute. I'll try to go over Strategy 5 real quick, but just as a reminder, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask on the webinar portion of the presentation, you'll see the Ask Question, and you can actually submit a question to us, and we'll try to get to them. As many of the questions as we can get to. So let me quickly jump into Strategy 5. So we've been talking a lot about the strategies that are really being facilitated as part of the Fed's engagement and leader catalyst role and different industry initiatives. But Strategy 5 is really tied to the Fed as a service provider and the enhancements that we can make in that arena to our current services to help foster and really be part of the process to improve the U.S. payment system. So moving on to slide number 25, just to highlight a couple of the year one accomplishments, things that have transpired over the last year since the publishing of the strategies paper. First, and this was right around the time of the strategy paper launch, because this was a piece that we had heard from the industry that there could be some really nice benefit to the industry if our national net settlement service had an expanded window as far as when it could be used. The service itself, prior to any expansion, was actually a 5-day, essentially a 9 to 5 window that the service was available. We actually were able to expand that slightly, adding about an hour and a half to the National Net Settlement Service window on a daily basis, but still on a 5-day basis. The next phase, and we've actually looked at this as a phased approach, was to actually look at expanding it a little bit more and aligning it with the open of FedWire so that it would be available at 9 p.m. To start settlement activity. So actually this year, just at the end of last year, I should say, we opened up the ability for folks to make requests for that expansion. So if organizations had a need and were looking to expand to national net settlement or the ability to use it, they could actually come into the Fed and make those requests. So that process was actually opened up in December of last year. Next was our announcement to support and begin the planning for the NACHA same-day ACH initiative. Certainly, I think many of you are familiar with that, whereby we'll allow a phased-in approach to facilitate a same-day ACH process. Same-day ACH is something that the Fed has offered in the past for a number of years to our services that we provide to financial institutions, but this is really aligning with the NACHA initiative to allow for same-day ACH across the entire ACH network. So those are things that are underway right now to actually start the process and getting financial institutions ready to be able to support that initiative later this year for phase one. And then finally, this collaboration with FS-ISAC to really help distribute their community bank threat report back to financial institutions via our electronic channel, FedLine. So using that secure portal to be able to share that information back to the community banks on any threat reports that are out there. So that has been implemented as well. So those are a couple of the accomplishments with the Fed Financial Services arena. And let me see, I believe we've got a couple more things on slide 27 here. If we just move ahead to the next slide. Some of the next steps is certainly the implementation, like I mentioned, of same-day ACH and then looking at potentially exploring some additional Fed Global capabilities down the road. So more to come on that. We do want to get to the questions, though, because we do have a number of questions. Connie, if we want to jump in, I know we only got about 5 minutes left.
Yep. Let me hit a couple of these quick ones. First and foremost, I'd hate for any of you to leave without an answer to this question. How do you get involved with the task force? fedpaymentsimprovement.org, which is on the slide in front of you. If you go on either task force, the faster page, the faster menu, or the secure menu, go to the task force pages, you'll get specific instructions about how to sign up for the task forces. There was a question about, do the task forces have generational segments represented? Although we don't collect that kind of demographic data from participants, I can tell you from participating on both task forces that, yes, we have generational representation. Now, there are a couple of questions here, Dan, that you can maybe sort of hit as a group. I'll read them off and you can cover the landscape. Sure. Is there an update as to the cost of shifting the U.S. toward a faster payment system? Our paper noted the study that we conducted that gave a range of 3.8 to 7.2 billion in cumulative industry-wide costs. There's also a question here, Dan, about there's no criteria around cost or economics of the program. How will that be addressed? So can you kind of speak to those cost questions, Dan?
Sure. So regarding the cost that was laid out in the paper, that was from a study that we had done a few years back. We commissioned McKinsey to do that, and that was their estimate that they came up with as far as implementation costs. Those numbers have not been redone specifically by us, but there have been other organizations throughout the payments industry that have taken other looks and come up with other numbers. But the numbers that we had put forth were generally conservative, and it certainly is a wide range, but there's no specific numbers that have been redone in regards to coming up with that type of an estimate. And regarding estimate in the criteria or cost estimate, there was some discussion and deliberation within the task force as to how to address the cost aspect. So within the criteria, there are some criterion within the efficiency group that start to get to and address some of the implications of implementing this system. So that will be up to the solution providers to really lay out what that would look like and how they would address those criteria. So while cost itself became a little bit of a touchy issue to address, and certainly with antitrust concerns, you do need to be careful with that. But those efficiency criteria were really laid out to try to address some of those implementation timelines and different variables that would facilitate that process to get the new process up and running. Connie, here, there's another question about will the clearinghouse showcase its solution? And maybe what I can answer there is, so certainly all organizations are welcome to submit. Anyone that has a real-time payments capability or something that can facilitate the process are welcome to submit a showcase. And that is the portal that I described, and folks have the ability to do that publicly or within the task force confines. But that is really up to each organization, and folks can actually go out to the showcase on fedpaymentsimprovement.org to take a look at who has submitted different showcase capabilities to date.
Thanks, Dan. We've got a question here related to security, and the question is, will the monitoring of BSA OFAC be required and included with the final secure payments criteria? And I would note, I flashed the security criteria on the screen, spoke to those a bit, but if you go out and read the 11 security criteria that are part of the faster payments criteria, compliance, it asks solutions to describe and demands, if you will, that they demonstrate how they will comply with these monitoring requirements and reporting, things like BSA, OFAC. And so they do, the criteria do speak to the need for any faster payment solution to support compliance with existing regulations and reporting requirements. There's a question here about, and I realize we're at the top of the hour. I appreciate if folks have to drop. We just have 2 questions, so I'm going to go just a couple of minutes over for those that want to stay on the line so that we can address these questions. Is there an update on consideration of the use of distributed technology, and is the Fed involved in industry groups such as R3? So Dan, do you want to, speak to what we're seeing there in terms of interest in that technology? And I think the question is asking specific to this faster payments solution process.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that has come up through the entire process is that there certainly is a lot of innovative technologies and potential solutions out there in the marketplace to potentially facilitate a real-time payments capability, distributed ledger technology certainly being one of those. And there are a number of participants on the task force that actually operate in that space. And then when you get to the actual proposal process, those folks will certainly be welcome to submit their proposals and be part of the assessment process. So any folks, again, there's no preconceived or described or laid out process to facilitate a real-time payment process for the U.S. But the task force efforts is really to take a look at and see what's out there and what the different solutions could potentially bring to the table to meet the needs that were described within the effectiveness criteria. So certainly they're part of the conversation and are certainly welcome to participate through the proposal process.
All right, thanks, Dan. And let me just close it out by speaking to the last question. What are the synergies, if any, with the TCS Faster Payments Initiative, that might be the Clearinghouse Initiative, but frankly, I'll speak to any of the faster payments initiatives out there in the marketplace. And our task force process is really designed to complement and enhance the innovation that's happening in the marketplace. As Dan noted, we're really inviting, encouraging all of the folks that are innovating in this space to participate in the process. And as a benefit, as they participate and bring their solution proposals forward, by virtue of this assessment against the criteria, the comments and suggestions they'll receive from the qualified independent assessment team, as well as the task force, really create an opportunity for private sector players to enhance the capabilities that they have brought to market or are bringing to market. And so this process is independent of what's happening, but it's meant to complement and enhance the innovation happening in the marketplace, and certainly not to slow it up in any way. So we are 5 minutes over. I see maybe a couple of other questions dribbling in, but I want to respect everyone's time. So let me reassure you that we will follow up individually to any of the questions that are coming in now. And if you have other questions, please, fedpaymentsimprovement.org has a webmaster function. Feel free to submit additional questions there, and we will follow up and get you the information that you need. So with that, let me thank you for joining us today and reiterate again that, one, if you'd like to just follow what's happening, make sure you get these invitations to provide input, invitations to events like these. Please go out to fedpaymentsimprovement.org and sign up to be part of the community. If you're interested in participating at an even higher level, or get involved, instructions out there. You can sign up for the Remittance Coalition. You can sign up for the task forces. We really would welcome any and all who are able to and want to contribute to those efforts. So with that, thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.